I had more control than I thought I did. So this list is not entirely inclusive, but I'm going to mention a couple of folks in particular. The speakers and their respective families. This has been, for me, the most eye-opening experiences I've ever had in academia in learning about what we need to do differently. And I think that the concept here of having speakers, patients, families center stage, with their own voices has been, like I said, really astonishing to me. So I want to thank you all for everything that you've been able to share with us. Participants online and locally here, a long list of funders and supporters here, people who've been behind the scenes. I want to thank one person in particular, Paul Meltzer, who is my supervisor. He gives me a lot of freedom to be able to set these kinds of things up and to look across bigger pictures. The organizing committee, I'm going to look just for fun at the number of emails that I have from one or more of the organizing committees. It's definitely into the 4 digits, and I'm not joking. So with that, I'm going to put up a couple of pieces of contact information. The top line there is for signing up for an email list. That email list is going to be, right now, announcement only. So we're going to use that as a way to communicate with folks about further plans. Obviously, we want to set up a better communication system going forward, but that's where we'll start. If you have comments or questions related to the symposium, that email, the second email, NCI participant share data at mail.nih.gov, will remain live. Several of us monitor it. My email and contact information is there. I would love personal feedback, global feedback. I'm happy to make connections, that kind of thing for folks. At this point, I just wanted to try in, about 6 or 7 minutes to summarize kind of what I've heard. And one thing I'm struck by, so I'm a pediatric oncologist, and when people started talking to me about precision medicine, for those of you who do know something about pediatric oncology, we've been doing precision medicine for like 60 years. It's just that the notation is new, and the technologies that we use to categorize and then come up with treatments for patients have changed. So all of this stuff that we think of as new is really old. And some other things come along with this new technology trigger and give us an opportunity here are really things like informed consent. Who would have thought that in 2019 that we'd still be talking about how to do informed consent right? Information versus data. We talked a lot about data, but what I heard from patients is they want information, not data. If sharing data gets them information, they're going to do that. But they want information. And the reason they want information is that they need to be empowered to make decisions. And what I'm also hearing from patients and researchers alike is that we're not doing a very good job at figuring out how to make decisions. As researchers, we don't know what boundaries that we should be allowed to cross with patients. As patients, we don't know how to get the right information, and in Jace's case, he made such a poignant case for the timeliness of getting information. It's out there, but he needs it yesterday. We talk about patient rights, and in the same breath, you have to talk about paternalism. And I had a great discussion with a researcher yesterday who said something along, I'm going to paraphrase, something along the lines of, as I'm thinking about doing my research, this really doesn't apply to me because my higher-ups are not going to allow me to share information back to patients, share data back to patients. And I was thinking, wow, we really have to have a different vision for what clinical research and clinical care look like. And that leads me to this concept of partnerships. So Carly mentioned this in her talk in a couple of slides, that We need to make researchers and in general the healthcare system more data savvy. We don't know how to do that yet, but we do know that we have some strong stakeholders. She mentioned a couple things that are quite useful. We need face-to-face, so locality matters. Like being able to come to conclusions or make decisions in a local environment where people are talking to each other, understanding each other, is much easier to do than when we're talking abstractly. There's this concept in software development called the steel thread. And the steel thread is the idea that you take something, a goal that you have, and you don't try to do the biggest thing first. You try to do the smallest thing first. You try to start from the very beginning and go to the very end. And you stretch this steel thread. The thread can be very, very thin, but with that steel thread, you can then begin to pull bigger steel threads. And you can actually build bridges that way. So I think in many of these cases, we talk about data sharing, we talk about data ownership. We're talking about things that are so abstract and so big that it's nearly impossible to think about a global solution. But then we heard yesterday during session 2 that a lot of groups have figured out how to build that steel thread. They've built things that work for their communities, and how can we leverage those? I'm going to come back to Janet's wayfinding metaphor. We're at the place right now, I think many of us are at a place right now where we're thinking about orientation. We don't know exactly what direction to go. In fact, a lot of us have tried different directions. We need to route monitor. We need to figure out where we are. That's part of, I think, the conversation that NIH can help with is how can we continue to monitor? How can we continue to peek into these communities that are successful and the ones that aren't, to learn? And then finally, what is the destination that we want to reach? And I think that Janet's last slide, or second to last slide, that she and Corey put together of the arrow with all the little boxes on it of ways to interact and engage with patients throughout the process is a really nice way of recognizing when we've reached our destination, when we can check a box that says that we've actually engaged with all patients from the very beginning and driven research that's patient-directed. One thing that is the last thing I'll mention was incredibly surprising to me, it shouldn't have been, was the power of patience, this discovery of the power of patience. We've heard stories that motivate, jerk at our emotions, but more importantly, we've heard from some people who are incredibly good at getting their points across. They're self-selected. Amanda, Jace to a certain extent, these folks have done an amazing job of telling their stories and moving the field forward. And I'm thinking that as researchers and as clinicians, we don't do enough service to them. We don't empower them. We don't use them as a resource as often as we could. So this is something that Janet actually didn't bring up, but I'd seen as something that she's working with, is to develop this concept of research advocates. In my work with Bill Posman, I was struck by how effective he's been in one aspect of his life, but he's trying to move into a different aspect. He's trying to move into a place that allows him to impact researchers and patient care. And it's a very different landscape. And so is there a way that we can, I think this is something that I can say, yes, we can do this, to educate advocates and patients with how to use their voice more effectively. And I think that we have this possibility of really changing the way that leadership in organizations and policy leaders think if we're able to leverage patients more effectively than we have up to this point. And the last thing I'll mention is that we're using the word patients here, but Manny pointed out to me that we're not all patients at any given time. We're all humans, though, and we do have a shared human condition. And one of the things about genomics is that it really puts a point on the fact that we are all in a human condition, all going through the human condition together. So we may not all be patients, but it's likely that we will be at some point in the future, and genomics can help us to understand what that's going to look like, and it will inform how we're treated in the future. So even though it might not be true that we can use this information right now as individuals, it will come back to us, and that's not just true of genomics, but really of a lot of things that we understand about each other. So I'm going to stop there. Let's continue the conversation electronically, in person, and I really look forward to reaching out and keeping in touch with a lot of new acquaintances that I've made and hopefully some new friends. So thank you so much.